Your ancestors were not the grunting, club-wielding simpletons history books often depict. That image is a fiction, a caricature born from centuries of misunderstanding our origins. In reality, the Paleolithic era demanded a level of cognitive agility we rarely acknowledge. Imagine an environment that shifted violently, turning lush forests into frozen, barren tundra overnight. This was not a playground. It was a high-stakes, chaotic laboratory for human survival. Survival required more than brute force. It required the systematic application of engineering. To thrive, they had to solve problems that would baffle a modern city dweller. Consider the thermal management of a shelter during an Ice Age winter. This wasn't just living in a cave. It was climate-controlled structural design. They mapped migration patterns with the precision of modern logistics experts. Every tool was a calculated response to a specific environmental constraint. We see the stone, but we miss the sophisticated logic behind its shape. This was a period of constant, rapid adaptation and intense mental labor. If they failed to innovate, they didn't just struggle, they disappeared. Yet, they didn't just survive. They thrived across every continent on Earth. They mastered fire, not as a gift, but as a controlled chemical reaction. They understood the properties of materials long before the concept of chemistry existed. This was intelligence applied to the raw chaos of the natural world. We are the descendants of the most successful engineers in human history. Their survival was not a stroke of luck. It was a triumph of design. So how exactly did they turn these hostile environments into a home? It started with the most fundamental tool of all, the human brain. Survival in the Paleolithic was never a solo endeavor. It was a collective project. Social cohesion acted as the ultimate shield against a world teeming with apex predators. A lone individual was prey. A tribe was a force to be reckoned with. But this unity relied on a sophisticated, invisible network, vocal communication. Before complex language, they used rhythmic calls to coordinate movement and warn of danger. These warning systems were precise, conveying intensity, distance, and type of threat. Communication wasn't just about survival. It was the glue for cooperative hunting. By splitting tasks, they minimized individual risk and maximized energy returns. Even scavenging, often dismissed as primitive, required high-level team tactics. They weren't just eating. They were managing a high-stakes energy economy. This required trust, memory, and the ability to project future needs. Trust was the currency of the Paleolithic group. Without it, the group would fracture under the pressure of the environment. But they didn't fracture. They evolved. Their social structures were the foundation for every innovation that followed. We see the tools they left behind, but we often miss the team that used them. Every spear, every scraper, every hearth was a testament to their collective intelligence. This was the era where we learned that we are stronger together. But how did they manage the internal conflicts that inevitably arise in such groups? They developed complex social rules to keep the peace, rules that would define the very essence of human society. This was the true beginning of civilization. Surviving the Ice Age required more than just fire. It demanded advanced engineering. They mastered the art of thermal insulation through complex, multi-layered clothing designs. Each layer served a specific purpose: moisture wicking, wind blocking, and heat retention. But clothing was only half the battle. They needed robust, climate-controlled architecture. Mammoth bone shelters provided a durable, structural framework in wood-scarce environments. These were not haphazard piles. They were precisely calculated, load-bearing designs. The interior was a masterclass in environmental management and ventilation. Proper ventilation was critical to prevent freezing and dangerous moisture buildup. They understood air pressure and heat convection long before they were defined by physics. This was applied science, honed through generations of trial and error. Every decision, from bone placement to hide thickness, was a life-or-death choice. They turned the harsh, frozen landscape into a functional, habitable space. Their architectural legacy is a testament to human ingenuity. We often think of ourselves as the masters of the environment, but our ancestors were the ones who wrote the manual. This was the foundation of our modern engineering prowess. They didn't just survive. They built the future, and their methods were far more sophisticated than we ever imagined. But what about their diet? Was it really just meat-heavy, as we've been told? The truth is much more complex and much more interesting. Let's look at the evidence. Fire was not just a survival tool, It was the engine of human evolution. It provided warmth, a critical defense against predators, and a way to process food. Cooking unlocked calories, fueling the rapid expansion of the human brain. But maintaining this flame in a harsh, treeless tundra was a massive logistical challenge. They had to source, transport, and store fuel with extreme efficiency. Bone and dried dung became the primary fuel sources in these extreme environments. Beyond utility, the fire pit became the heart of the tribe. It was a social hub where stories were shared and knowledge was passed down. This nightly gathering catalyzed language and cultural development. They learned to communicate complex ideas, building a shared reality. The firelight created a space where the imagination could flourish. They weren't just surviving. They were beginning to wonder. This was the birth of human consciousness as we know it. Fire transformed the world, and in turn, it transformed us. But this progress came at a cost. The constant need for resources meant they were always on the move. This nomadic lifestyle was a necessity, not a choice. They were masters of adaptation, constantly reinventing themselves. This is the story of human resilience. But what happens when the environment changes again? The challenge was just beginning, and the next chapter would be the most difficult yet. Survival was a balancing act, often favoring the efficiency of the scavenger. Scavenging wasn't just leftovers. It was a high-reward, low-energy strategy. It allowed them to access dense protein without the massive risk of hunting. But protein was only one piece of the dietary puzzle. They were masters of dietary flexibility, shifting resources based on seasonal availability. This ability to toggle between plant and meat sources was their greatest advantage. To maximize this intake, they engineered increasingly sophisticated stone tools. Each tool was a specialized machine designed for a specific caloric task. They weren't just using stones. They were manipulating the physics of cutting and crushing. This efficiency allowed them to spend less time foraging and more time innovating. It was a virtuous cycle of survival, intelligence, and cultural growth. Even in the most extreme conditions, they found ways to thrive. They weren't just reacting. They were actively shaping their world. But the environment was not static. Climate shifts forced them to constantly adapt, push, and evolve. This was the crucible of human intelligence. Every challenge was an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to build. They were the architects of their own destiny. But the journey was far from over. New landscapes, new challenges, and new innovations awaited. And we are the living legacy of their success. The story of human survival is the story of us. Survival wasn't just about predators. It was a constant battle against invisible killers. Pathogens and disease were silent, relentless drivers of early human evolution. Maternal and fetal mortality rates were staggering, threatening the survival of every tribe. This pressure forced humans to adapt their behaviors to limit exposure to infection. Sanitation became a survival technology, keeping living spaces free of waste. They learned to avoid stagnant water, identifying sources of contamination. The fire was also a tool for sterilization, heating tools, and food alike. Social distancing, though not by name, became a common practice during outbreaks. These behavioral shifts were essential for the survival of the tribe, but the threat of disease remained a constant, looming reality. It was a selection pressure that refined the human immune system. We are the survivors of this brutal generational struggle. Every immune defense we have today was forged in that crucible. But disease was only one part of the challenge. The landscape itself was a formidable opponent. And the journey to new lands brought new, unforeseen dangers. They were explorers in the truest sense of the word, driven by curiosity and the need for new resources. They mapped the world, one step at a time. And their legacy is written in our very DNA. We are the descendants of the ultimate survivors. And the story continues. Over millennia, these survival groups evolved into vast, interconnected cultural networks. Yet those ancient survival instincts remain hardwired deep within our modern brains. We still crave the safety of the group and the security of the hearth. Our ancestors did not survive because they were the strongest or the fastest. They survived because they were the ultimate ecosystem generalists. Flexibility was their primary survival technology. This adaptability allowed us to colonize every corner of the planet. We are the descendants of those who could change when the world changed. Our history is not a static record of the past. It is a living, breathing guide for our future. The challenges of the Paleolithic are gone, but the spirit of innovation remains. We are the architects of our next great adaptation. And just like our ancestors, we will find a way, because adaptability is not just our history, it is our essence. The story of human survival is the story of us.